Hi, James.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to be here. It's like such a fun forum to do demos and get to talk.
Yeah, before the demo, I'm very excited to see the demo, but maybe before the demo, can you tell us a few words about yourself and about the tool you want to show us?
I'm James Campbell. I'm the CTO at Superconductive, which is the team behind the tool Great Expectations. I have gotten to be working on this project now for more than 4 years, which is really exciting. Started off as a purely open source kind of side project, and now we're like I mentioned, we have a company focused on supporting this. My background is in analytics. I spent a lot of time in applied math. First applied to cybersecurity related problems, and then political modeling. And as I was doing that, I got very, very interested in helping people to understand and convey confidence, like how confident can we be in judgments, and being able to effectively use and share models and the data that supports those models. So that's where Great Expectations was born. It's a tool for data quality, for helping people deal with all the frustrations of data that gets dropped, that gets missing, that doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. All the kind of realities that come with modern data systems. We really help people wrestle with that and get to a confident position around using it.
Probably there's no data team on Earth that does not need to deal with these kind of problems, right?
Unfortunately, that is very true. Or maybe it's fortunate because I think of
For you.
data quality as like an opportunity to really understand what you have, like understand your assets better.
Okay, let's see the demo.
All right. So what I wanted to do is I'm going to share screen and we'll jump right into a project. I put together just a little notebook that walks through both how the core Great Expectations experience is and has been, and also one of the really new features that we're working on. So Great Expectations is a Python library that you can import. You can import it in a notebook. Of course, it can be integrated directly in pipelines. We have a CLI tool, so you don't have to be in Python to use it by any means. But I'll just show, I'll import Great Expectations. A data context stores all the configuration about um, data data sources that you're going to be working with and so forth. In this demo, I've grabbed some data from the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. So I've configured an asset for the yellow cab data, and I'm grabbing the 1 year ago data, like 12 ago batch of that data. And this is a feature we've had for a long time, the notion of being able to do exploratory analysis by getting a validator. The validator makes it possible to look at your data just like you would with the regular data frame. Now, one cool thing that Great Expectations does here is it makes it possible for the same interface to work across all different data sources. So expectations can run across Pandas or Spark or different SQL dialects. And similarly, we can have this same kind of a interaction in any of those environments. Once I have a batch of data and I can write my expectations. And this is the classic experience that users have come to love for Great Expectations, the ability to be declarative and describe specifically the things that they know about their data. I think of it a lot as out of band knowledge, like things that you know that should be true from your data based on the way it was collected or the way it is being used and so forth, not just from looking at the data itself. So for example, I might think, all right, well, if somebody's taking a cab, a yellow cab in New York City, there should be between 1 and 6 passengers. And it turns out that's not always true. About 2% of the rides include things like rides with 0 passengers. I will say, I've obviously seen this data set before, so I can't claim to be completely surprised. But every time I do this, there's something exciting or surprising when you're using this kind of interactive flow to explore data. Now, Great Expectations makes it possible for us to tune that expectation and say, all right, well, if I think about it as a batch, like how do I know that this batch of data had a problem? Well, maybe it's just then that most of the data, 96% of the data, should have between 1 and 6 passengers. And at that point, the expectation is met. So let's say I've done this now for a while. I've gone through and I've experimented and explored different expectations. I can save my suite. And then one of the really cool things is we can build data docs. And what that does is, it just gives us this rendered HTML, and I'll just drop it into a web browser here, and I will make that big. Gives us this HTML that we can use to look at what we've just done. So we have this expectation suite. And we're translating that directly into a clear natural language sentence that represents our expectation about the data. So for the passenger count column, values should be between 1 and 6 most of the time, or almost always, actually, I think I would say, for 96%. Now that experience is really cool. One of the things that I think is particularly exciting that we're doing now is responding to the way that you get started. So this workflow is really, really great for somebody who's working with a data set that they know or want to know well. They're working with partners and they're capturing their expectations. But we can also do something here. What I'm doing is I'm looking at, instead of just that one batch from a year ago, I'm taking 9 months of batches, 9 months of data, and looking at it month by month. And I'm saying, all right, let's take a look at that. And then we've got this volume data assistant, which will take a look for a specific, we call it a data assistant because it's helping you get started by exploring and understanding your data. It's assisting you in creating expectations. So what that'll do is it'll go out, it'll look across these past several months of data in order to build a profile of the data. Once I've done that, I can plot the expectations and metrics that it generates. So I can see, all right, well, here's like the total number of rows that have been in the data over those months. Given that distribution of data, here's some kind of candidate expectations that we might expect to be useful. Of course, you can tweak those. I can look in at individual columns. Let's see, what's a good one to look at? Like the rate codes, say, and see that, all right, in every single batch, we've seen exactly 6 different rate codes be used. Once I've done that, I can, get that suite and then just save it. I'll just save it directly. So the suite that I get is the assistant's kind of recommendation. So instead of me doing all that exploratory work, if I just ask the assistant to recommend some expectations, what would it do? Let me save that and just rerun that data docs. Now, if I go back and look at my expectation suites, I have a few temporary suites that I use, but I have this new assistant volume suite. And you'll notice I've immediately gotten bootstrapped with a large collection of expectations that I can use to understand the data potentially better. Now, it doesn't bring the out-of-band knowledge because these expectations are built directly from the data. That's actually really useful for teams when they're getting started with the data problem and they're wanting to be able to quickly put a lot of different assets under test. Now, one of the other really important things about Great Expectations, I mentioned that you don't need to be in a Python notebook, is we have this concept of a checkpoint. So I have created a little checkpoint here called demo, which will run the in this case, I picked an older batch, run the expectation suites against some batches of data. So let's run that checkpoint. And when we do that, it will also update our data docs. So we can see these are the validations obviously I just ran just now. So if I look at these, I can see, all right, I get now this is not surprising because I've just built the suite, but I can get the validation results for the expectations that were proposed, and then also in this case, the expectation that we manually created, keeping both of those suites available. Now, if I go one step further, the volume assistant is nice, and as you can see, we made an expectation about the total number of rows, about the number of unique values. We also have this assistant we're calling the onboarding assistant. Now, what the onboarding assistant does is it just takes a much broader look across different characteristics of the data set. So this will include volume-related expectations, but it'll also include some distributional expectations, looking at quantiles of numeric values. For string values, it'll look for common regexes that may be relevant in defining and helping to understand the data set. So I'm running this again on that same batch request of, about, I think it was 9 months of this New York City taxi data. Once that finishes, I'll do the same thing. I'll save the suite as, now I'll call this one onboarding, and then then we'll take a look at the checkpoint. I've created another checkpoint called onboarding, where we'll do basically the same thing, except for this time I'm going to run it against the most recent batch. So we're looking at, all right, if I had been looking at some historical data, playing it forward, new data has come in, and we're providing an anomaly detection like capability here. Again, focused on not just something was unusual, but let's provide as much context as we can about the situation, and then help you with the ability of continuing to dial in and refine your expectations. Of course, this is an exciting one, so there must be running a lot of good checks. Slash maybe
in this. Sorry for interrupting. I'm just wondering, this demo YAML and onboarding YAML, is it something you had to prepare, or they were automatically generated? Like, how did you create them?
These are these are our these are called checkpoint configurations, and you don't need to write it by hand by any means. Our CLI tool has a command, checkpoint new, that will help you, give you a guided experience for creating the checkpoint. I mean, this is a cool feature in its own right, but would kind of push our demo time. What this is doing is it's letting you do actions like, for example, I could add a Slack notification action. So if I have a failure, then I'll fire off a Slack alert, or I can do any number of things based on the result of the validation. In this case, all I'm doing is storing the result and updating our docs, the doc site that we were just looking at, based on the validation. So we've run that assistant. Let's go ahead and run the checkpoint. And the onboarding checkpoint is I think basically the same like I was describing, except for now I'm running that same exploration suite, the one that we did just a moment ago that has a single expectation in it. And then this onboarding assistant, the one that we were looking at a moment ago, that we, as you'll see, created a bunch more expectations. So let's look at what we got. So if I switch back over at expectations, you'll see now I have this onboarding suite. And this onboarding suite, like as you can see, it's a much more comprehensive view of your data. So it starts off, we have a schema level expectation. I'm making I'll make this bigger. Some expectations about the presence of particular columns. And then for each of the columns, I'm putting together a range of expectations, nullity. So we should always have location ID, pickup location, and so forth. Interestingly, in some cases we're looking at, presumably these are tip amounts, and we're putting it in a set. So there's some kind of, we call it profiling, that is being used to guess the type of the column, the semantic type of the column, and then expectations are built based on that. If I look at the validation result, this is our most recent run that we just hit. So we have sort of the same picture here when I had just a single expectation. Now we're running on this, looks like February was actually the most recent data from this year that's been released. If I look at the onboarding assistant, this is where I start getting that much more comprehensive picture with all of those expectations that were just generated. I can see individual failures and be able to dial in more specifically on what is going on and what we're seeing. So like this is an interesting one, like where we have you know, interesting, a tiny fraction of the values are popping out as unique. So clearly there's almost always a single rate code that's used in this data. The onboarding assistant now gives us this picture that we can use, and we can use it. I think there's a variety of different ways we see people using this. One is by directly putting this in as a kind of a triage mechanism. So I use those initial expectations that are proposed to help dial into where I want to look. And another way is to provide a kind of a graceful onboarding. So I have all these expectations available to me, and some of those I might put into my more failure-oriented suite that are vetted by the data team. So I think that's where I'll wrap up for demo today.
I'm just I have a few questions. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understood we use it. So first we come up with the suite or suits, right? That suits are basically different checks that we want, different expectations we have about the data. Then these suits are saved somewhere, and then we can run them. Like this is something you showed in this YAML file. You say this is the data set, this is the suite. I just run the suite of expectations against this data set, and this generates this report, right? And I guess in practice, the way we would use is we would create the suits, then we would put them somewhere in a batch job in our data pipeline, right? And then we say, okay, for the previous step, whatever was the previous step that produces this data, just run this suite, right? And save the HTML file here, or send a Slack message here, stuff like that, right?
Absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. I also noticed this thing, like you have this batch request or something, like where you were pulling the data, and I'm curious, how does it work? Does it go directly to this limousine taxis and limousine website and pulls the parquet files, or you have them in a database somewhere? Where does this data come from?
Yeah, so in this example, we were reading files locally, CSV files from our local drive, and processing them with Pandas. But what the batch request is doing is allowing you to configure a data source that can reach out and access the data wherever it resides. So it could be in a data warehouse, it could be in a blob store, in a cloud provider, and we make that completely transparent for the validation process.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in this case, like in case it's CSV, you read it with Pandas, but in case it's stored in, I don't know, BigQuery or Snowflake, then you read this with, you check the data with SQL, right? Is this
exactly
how it works?
Exactly. And just, to be very explicit, with BigQuery, the data stays in BigQuery. All of the checks are translated and run there.
Mm-hmm. But if it's S3 or, I don't know, your local directory, then you read this with Pandas and then you execute the expectations against the data frame, right?
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. But I imagine that here you just show that, okay, this is the data source. Give me the, what was -10, or I don't remember. So you had this, you pre-configured this, right, before the demo. So if I wanted
Yes.
to reproduce the demo, then I would need to download the CSV files, and I would need to define a data source somewhere, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, you could also use the same names and point them to another location. So for example, just like I mentioned, there's a checkpoint new command. There's a data source new command that will give you a guided experience of configuring a data source. Now, I can't not say that there is definitely a lot of configuration that you saw, right? And that's been sort of a natural consequence of being an open source project, and making it easy for people to contribute, and trying to focus a lot on extensibility. What we are doing right now at Superconductive is we have we're still in beta on this, but we have a cloud product that manages all the configuration for you and supports creating configuration artifacts, so that you don't have to do any any looking at YAML files or those kinds of things in order to be able to take advantage of Great Expectations.
Well, maybe there are people who love looking at YAML files, right?
I mean, it's just it can be a lot. And I think especially when you think about what we talked about today with the onboarding assistant, making it easy to just like
It was a bit
jump right.
overwhelming, but yeah, I think that was really great. So I could feel like how useful it is, and especially the onboarding feature, like it helps with defining these expectations, these checks. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How many people actually work on this? I imagine this is a massive amount of effort that you put there. Must be a lot of people.
It is. Well, we're growing quickly. Actually, this, we're just over 50 people now at
50
Superconductive. Of course, not all of those are on the engineering team, and there's been a lot of growth that is not from inside our company, right? I think in order to have a successful open source project, it really takes a big supportive community. We have in fact, I think we ran a hackathon recently that resulted in many hundreds of new submissions. And we have, a vibrant Slack community where people are engaged and asking questions. And I think there's a lot of activity and work and support that you don't see just by like the number of people in one company when it comes to building a product like this.
Well, somebody wants to also join this couple of hundred people who contribute and also make a contribution. How can they do this?
So I would say start in our Slack channel, and we in the workspace. If you go to greatexpectations.io, there's a link to join our Slack community. And when you're in that community, we have a contributors contributing channel, and we have a really, really good developer relations team that helps people. If you're starting off, I just have an idea and I want to talk through it. We'd love to do that with you and help make sure that you've got all the support and help you need to be able to make it a successful contribution. And then of course we're available on GitHub, so we're also just open for pull requests. If there's sort of no contribution too small in order to make the product better. And I think there's lots of opportunities. It could be ranging from documentation to a new expectation, which can be fairly contained, to new integrations, actions like notifications for different environments.
Yeah, thanks. Well, maybe the last one. Do you have any advice for anyone who is watching this?
My advice is, I don't know that it's particularly specific to any one project, but I think specific in the spirit of demoing neat open source projects, it's to work on the things that you love. For me, being able to support people in the process of engaging and learning about the data sets that they're working with and run effective tests, I think is actually just an exciting problem to work on, and I love it every day. And so find that thing and keep doing it. And of course, I hope it's also great expectations for you too if you're listening.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for doing the demo. Great demo. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.